Hi, I'm Susan Kessel, and you're watching Fairfield Public Access Television, Channel 9. This morning I was reading the newspaper, and I happened to notice that today we're taping on Martin Luther King's birthday, and he was dedicated to furthering equality. And today we're going to talk about Fairfield Community Relations Committee in Fairfield, started by the Chamber. And we're going to talk about how this group was started and why and what we've been trying to do, and take a look at what's been going on behind the scenes. And I'd like to introduce Kevin Toohey, who is the chairman and the president-elect of the Chamber of Commerce. Kevin?
Good. Thank you, Susan. First of all, I'd like to make a couple quick corrections. Bev Nelson actually is now president-elect because we're now in
Okay, we have
1999.
changed already.
January 1st actually is the official changeover date.
Okay.
So I took over the mantle of presidency from Jeff Wilson several weeks ago. So Bev gets to be the person that...
Congratulations, Bev. We move up forward.
So, and I think maybe it would be helpful if we each would introduce ourselves first. Would that be helpful? Or should we
Yes,
go
I
around?
think that'd be a good
Okay.
way to start.
Okay.
And as I said, I'm Susan Kessel, and I'm on the committee for the community relations.
I'm Judith Cox, and I'm Director of Employee and Community Relations at Jefferson County Hospital. I'm representing both the hospital and the Rotary Club.
And I'm Bev Nelson, and I am chairman of the Community Relations Committee this year, and I'm president-elect at the Chamber.
And you work at?
And I work at Falco, where I'm in personnel.
And I am a business person here in town, one of the co-founders of PackageNet Express Shipping Centers, and also have a number of other businesses and investment banking background, and involved with the Chamber of Commerce as president for this year.
I'm Bob Moore. I work at Hawthorne Direct. I've been there for about 13 years. And I've got a wife and child who was born 8 years ago here in Fairfield. And I'm having a great time growing up here. And my daughter is a good local Fairfieldian. And we're enjoying our lives here.
And I'm Tim Kuiken. I'm an attorney with Foss, Kuiken and Guken. I'm on the Community Relations Committee, one of the original steering committee members, and I've been kind of missing a few meetings the last few months for health reasons, so I might be a little bit rusty on some of the things that are going on, but have been involved in enough that I can hopefully add some insight to it.
Now, I believe there are about 40 members on the group, and we were decided the function should be to promote greater understanding and mutual respect among the citizens of Jefferson County. That was our motto from the beginning. Do you want to tell about how this actually started, why we even thought we needed to do this?
Yeah, why don't I start, and then
Okay.
I don't think any of us are shy, so we'll all kind of pitch in. A year and a half ago or so, in the fall of '97, we had a mayoral election, which for many people within the community was a difficult time because of certain things that took place within that election. And I had many people that came up to me afterwards, feeling somewhat concerned to being very concerned about our community and as related to some of the activities or events that took place during that election. I don't think it's a surprise or a secret to anybody that in our community, we have a very diverse community. At the same time, there are many people in the community who have not got to know each other over these many years. I don't know the exact number, but probably 3,000 or 4,000 meditators in our town, and in a town of 10,000, so we've got maybe 6,000 or 7,000 others who don't meditate. And I think there's been a lot of strength in our diversity, but at the same time, there's been, I think, in many cases, a lack of understanding and mistrust, perhaps. And I think that came out in that election that took place in the fall of '97. I personally feel that the election situation turned out to be a very good situation because it allowed us as a community to put out on the table in a very forthright manner some of these issues, some of the concerns that many people had, both meditator and non-meditator, within our community. And not that this committee that was formed as a result of the events, which we'll explain in a moment, is going to solve immediately or, take care of these problems right away. But I think that it's a good first important step. And there have been other steps that have taken place over these past years in the 80s and early 90s as well. And I think this is another step in that evolutionary process of improving our overall strength of our community. And but how this committee actually started was really because of a letter that Bob wrote to the paper. And maybe you can give a quick background from your own perspective of what happened and then who met with you and kind of what took place in December and so on in '97.
Well, I woke up early in the morning after the election, I think it was about 4:30, and I'd tuned into the interim results the night before, and it was clear at that point who was going to win. And I saw how close it was, but I was more affected by the sentiments that were being expressed in town during the last several weeks, most notably during the election. And to me, it was distressing to see things come to a head, and I wanted to do what I could to help bring the town together, because I think the division was becoming wider as a result of the positions that people were taking in the election. And so I wrote a letter to the editor, and my basic thinking and feeling was to bring people together at a public meeting to focus on things that we have in common as a starting point, rather than focus on some of the things that were dividing us. And Jeff Wilson, who is editor of the Ledger, gave me a call. Was it Jeff? No. Actually, he was with Kevin at the chamber and showed Kevin the letter, I believe. And I got a call over at my place of employment from Jeff and Kevin. And they said, Bob, I see you've got this letter that is about ready to publish in the paper. Are you really sure you want to quite go about it this way? And I said, well, what's the problem? And Kevin, of course, who's been working with the community for many years, in various positions, but certainly with the chamber, he knew how to get points across throughout the community very constructively, and I listened, and he came over to my office. I think, was it that afternoon?
I think it was, or maybe next afternoon.
Right. But he and
soon.
Jeff and was it just Pat Doyle came over, and we talked about the wisdom of just calling for a town meeting to resolve our differences. Now, I'm a pretty pie-in-the-sky guy. I've been accused of that all my life, and I plead guilty to probably being unrealistic. But at least I got it out on the table, and what we decided to do was to put together a smaller group of people to focus on these issues and just kind of create a group of meditators and non-meditators and have a discussion group to start off with, if nothing else. And I forgot about the evolution, though. What happened after that?
So there was a group of about maybe 30 or so people that met at our home, at Louise's and my home in December, 2 or 3 weeks after that. And there was some great discussion that came out as a result of that. Bev, I think you were there, and Tim, I think you were there. No? Okay. I mean, didn't you feel from that first?
Yeah, definitely. We talked about, the election and the feelings that were going on in town, and it also overlapped into many other areas of things that were going on in town that were dividing the community. And also throughout that evening, it was also, we just went around and asked questions. We just went around the room and said, why you're here and what kind of questions would you have for the group. And it was a real learning experience that night. And then after that, it went to the chamber, right?
Right.
So then in January, we had our chamber retreat, and this got brought up at our retreat. And the retreat's just board members. And that's when we try to plan for what we're going to do for that year. So in '98 then, our very top priority was to do something about community relations that we had
And
to do.
that was the number one.
That was our number one plan. I mean, membership's always there, and those kinds of things are always there, but that was our number one item that we were going to work on and actually take a real active approach to.
I think one other quick thought to add to that is that some people asked me, well, what does a relations committee have to do with economic development? You know, why would the chamber be involved in that? And I think many of us feel that the chamber actually provides a basis for a strong economic environment that isn't just economic, but also has to do with quality of life. And to the extent that you have a community and its members who get along well, have mutual respect and understanding, it doesn't mean everybody agrees. In fact, I think the strength of our community and frankly of our country as a whole is that we do disagree. You've got the Democrats, you've got Republicans, you've got third parties on the political side. At the same time, you've got many other segments within our culture that have all different viewpoints. So I think we actually, the strength of our country is having different viewpoints. But I think sometimes there can be some real challenges if people aren't willing to be open-minded to hearing other perspectives, and I think that happens often when people don't know each other. And I think what came out in some of these discussions was that people didn't know each other, meditators or non-meditators.
Right. Also, a little background. When I was president of the chamber, and probably maybe when you were president of the Chamber of Commerce, we would have our yearly board meetings, and that discussion would come up, but the priority wasn't number one. We had liaisons, committees that were going on during those interim periods of time, and that developed a small stepping stone for probably what we're looking at today with our Community Relations Committee. As you know, the Chamber of Commerce has, per se, an organizational chart, and it has the strong committees of the activities of the blast-offs and the membership drives and the Fairfield manufacturers and all that sort of thing. And I can definitely see from this point forward, from 1998 up to now, that there's been just a really, really strong consensus within our group that we are just headed in the right direction. We're sharing, we're having some humorous moments, we're learning, and we're just looking forward to our projects that we're going to have for the whole community to join us.
If I could just add something too, I think initially when the group got together, there was really no official connection with the Chamber of Commerce. It was a group of people that had kind of self-appointed themselves to try and deal with this situation. And so I think when once I finally got to one of those meetings, that was one of the things of discussion, or one of the items of discussion is, where do we go from here? And I think the important thing at that point in time was you need to have some structure and some community recognition, or I guess the chamber has a certain amount of respect within the county as far as being a leadership role in the community. So by having the chamber take on that responsibility of having this entity within it, I think it gave it that amount of credence that the people look at it and say, well, it's part of the chamber, so it's something for the community or the betterment of the community. Right. And that's kind of the way it evolved at that point in time, to where the chamber actually said, well, we'll take it over and move on. So,
in fact, I think it was very fortuitous that the chamber's annual meeting retreat took place just a couple weeks after that, because it was still very lively in our awareness of what took place in the fall and in the election of '97. And so I think the chamber recognized that and really recognized the importance of taking some concrete action. Tim, do you want to give a background, because you were on the steering committee of the five of us. You want to mention who those were and kind of what happened and how we chose, or how the people on the committee got chosen?
Okay, well, we started out with 5 people on the steering committee, which is Bev, Kevin, Bob, myself, and Devlin Ort. There were 5 of us, and which we thought was a relatively good cross-section to begin with. But then we thought, you know, we can go out and pick these people that we want to be on this committee, but then what kind of legitimacy do we have? So at that point in time, we thought, how do we create some legitimacy so the community looks at this as not something we've selected, but that the community takes part in? So in effect, I think we ultimately arrived at that conclusion that if we go out to different entities in our community and say, we have this committee, you go ahead and appoint somebody that will be a representative to this committee, then nobody can accuse us of handpicking our group. And I think it's pretty clear that we haven't handpicked our group, because we've got people from the Farm Bureau, a couple representatives from the Farm Bureau who have probably enjoyed this quite a bit, a chance to sit down with people that they'd never really sat down and talked with. But you've got people from the school boards talking to each other more, and you've got different service organizations being represented, but they're the ones that have selected those representatives. So it just creates some
Entrepreneurial people also.
entrepreneurial people,
Few students.
few students,
And the Ministerial Churches Association.
right? And we have a little bit of turnover, of course, because some of the entities that select somebody on a yearly basis or every 2 years, so we'll get a little turnover there too. But
That's good, though, I think.
Well, I think so, too,
because
yeah.
it brings new people into the
It keeps it
process.
moving.
Right.
Right,
So it's been 1 year now that this group has been meeting, and you're probably getting ready for another chamber retreat,
right, right,
and you'll be discussing the progress of this committee.
right.
Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, the annual retreat is January 30th, Saturday, and I know there will be some discussion about this. To give just maybe a bit more history to add what Bev said about how it happened at the last retreat, we had an outside, as we do every year, we have an outside facilitator that comes in to help us look at the previous year in terms of our successes and where we could have done better, and then what do we plan to do for the following year. And this facilitator there were about 20 people, 25 people in the room, representatives of the City Council, of FIDA, of the Chamber Board, of course. And she asked us to write down, and actually we broke up into smaller groups of I think 3 or 4 people each, and then had us write down the top 3 things that we felt as a community we needed to address. And then when that was done, we then explained or told her what those points were, and she wrote them up on the board, and it turned out to be about maybe 15 points. There were some crossover, different things that were very close, so she would, there weren't any duplications. It was just, so we ended up with about 15, and then we probably had a 2-hour discussion about each one of those points, so everybody knew what those issues were, from senior housing to improvement of retail along the square, many, many different issues throughout the area. And then when we were all done with that, we each were given 3 stickers, and we had to vote for the top 3 things. Where we would just go up to the board. You didn't have to raise your hand. You just went to the board and you would put your sticker beside the one that you felt was most appropriate. And when we were done, and then the vote was taken, and the top vote getter, as you mentioned, Bev, was the actual wording was to improve relationships between meditators and non-meditators. And interestingly, the second vote getter was mending fences, which wasn't really focused only on meditator and non-meditator issues, but other issues within the community that created some divisiveness, whether it was airport expansion or the Lockridge School closing concern,
or the zoning.
The lake issue, a lot of those kinds of things. And again, I think that in any community where you have a lot of growth, you're going to have challenges, just because that's the nature of.
Anytime there's change.
Right, right. So that's a bit more of the history of. But for this coming retreat, I don't know yet how it's all going to turn out, because it is pretty much a democratic process of.
So when the top 2 issues came along, was this committee the only thing formed to address that, or as a solution to that, or were there other things?
I think one of the other things that comes to mind was that Bob Phipps had been going to meetings out on campus to their, not board of directors, but something to like a board of directors meeting. And so that was really beginning to help too, and that had kind of started about that same time. And so he had a better feel for what was going on, and invited different people. One gentleman, it was talking about development out north, and he came to one of the board meetings to explain it to the rest of the board. And those kinds of things were also going on. Can you think of anything else that was?
Well, I think that this committee, as Tim referred to a moment ago, was really to help create some credibility within the community as an arm of the chamber or as a committee within the chamber. There are so many other things in our community that I think are dealing with and addressing the issues of people getting to know each other. Habitat for Humanity has been, I think, a fantastic thing. Of course, you have Little League, which has been around for a long, long time. The swim team. There are so many things. A fact. the acting
Community
effort.
theater.
Yes, thank you.
I think all of us on the committee, we take back to our organizations and try and relay the message of being open-minded and having respect for each other. So that will in turn go on, domino effect within our community. So I think that's a big part of what our committee is doing.
But it takes time. You know,
Yes.
it doesn't happen overnight, and it can be frustrating, certainly for any of us, you know, that you see where you want to get to, but you know that it takes time for people to have a better understanding. It just takes time for people to have a change in mindset sometimes.
Mhm. I think one of the interesting things that when I talk about this committee to others, I say, well, for several months, we meet once a month, and we would just ask questions. Any question that would pop into somebody's mind, we would ask the group. I mean, why is there no south entrances? And, you know, why do townspeople really put up the wall when somebody else new moves in? I mean, you know, just you name it. And a lot of it was just the understanding and getting to know the others in the group and their viewpoints and why some of these things are done. And I think that was, I mean, we had several months of just that. It was so interesting when you were like, oh, we really have to quit. It's about 9 o'clock, but I still got another question to ask, you know? And so we did a lot of that. And that not only helped to get know the other people in your group, but also a better understanding as to why some things are done on both from the meditators and from the townspeople.
I thought it was interesting that we would ask maybe sometimes some pointed questions at other people, but we always listened and were open-minded and again had the respect.
Well, I think a good example of this was, I think, the meeting in July when we spent the whole 2.5 hours talking about food.
Yeah.
If you recall that.
Yes.
And,
Food. I missed
remember
that one.
I missed that one too. So.
It was a great meeting, right?
Yes, it was,
and
definitely.
and it's not so much that food in and of itself is a big deal, unless you're hungry, of course. But it really goes to the issue of philosophy, lifestyle, you know, what people think of others in terms of the kind of food they eat, and what were your thoughts, Judy, from what you?
Well, and
heard in
also
that meeting?
too, you look at for islands, you know, the basic staples of the meat and the potatoes and all that sort of thing. Then we're now introducing the pastas and just the different variations of the different steps that we are going to have a healthy society. So I think that's a great step for.
Not to mention tofu.
Right.
Yes, lots of talk about
Tofu, bacon burgers, and all that.
But I think something else that comes out too, of course, is the difference in food creates difficulties for interaction.
Right.
I mean, I've always thought
Without
that, too.
understanding.
Well, you know, it's like Judy says, you've got somebody who is used to eating, well, I'll just give an example. Every Labor Day weekend, we have a party where we make brats, and we have a keg of beer, and we have people bring potluck.
Great party.
Can
well-
we be invited next year?
Everyone watching is invited to Ken's house next year.
Oh.
You know, you always feel a little bit hesitant. Well, if I invite somebody that's a vegetarian that will not eat meat, do you feel like you're putting them, making it difficult for them because all of a sudden they're in a situation where maybe they don't feel comfortable, and maybe I don't feel as comfortable because it creates an awkward moment. Oh, well, we're having brats. Well, I don't eat brats. Well, you know, that sort of thing. And that's where the difference in the foods and understanding that and being able to start becoming more relaxed with the different types of foods will help increase the opportunities for social interaction. And I think that's where discussing foods, even though I wasn't there, would go, you know, take that step.
We actually talked about your annual party.
Yes.
Actually,
That you be in there as an example.
when you had made that statement to me at one time, and it was I was really taken by that. I honestly was. I mean, seriously,
in a
the
good way.
sensitivity that you were feeling toward your potential guests, and it also struck me as something that had never occurred to me, that there would be that awkwardness. So it's those kinds of issues that are so simple and natural to all of us that we have not been in the other person's shoes.
Right.
And just to hear that, to me, created a lot more respect for you, who I've always respected professionally. But I just understood what you were saying, and
It's those
I was
simple
really touched.
differences.
Yeah.
Those simple differences that you try and get out on the table, and by getting them out on the table, you alleviate a great deal of the problem.
Right.
And then also food in Fairfield, on the other hand, I love living here in Fairfield because of the variety. I love to eat different foods, the Chinese, the Indian, all the
Thai,
different,
yeah.
everything. It's wonderful, and what a positive thing has come out of that for Fairfield.
Right. Speaking from the Chamber's point of view, we have, I think, almost 40 restaurants. Or
Wow.
40 places to eat for a town of 10,000 people. I mean, this is pretty dramatic. We have people from all around Southeast Iowa and actually out of state who come to Fairfield across the river because of the food here. And the different
Look
choices.
forward to coming here
Yeah.
just so they can eat in the different restaurants.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is something that, as a committee, we should try and promote and take advantage of, and the positive aspects of what comes out of some of our conversations. What may start out as differences, but to take advantage of the positive. And I think that's what we also decided that we wanted to focus on as part of our efforts.
One thing I'd like to add to that, Susan, is where do we go from here? You know, I know that many people that I would be speaking with would ask, well, it's great that you guys are talking, but there's only 40 of you, there's 10,000 people or 16,000 in the county. What effect is this going to have in the larger perspective? And my response is that you have to start somewhere, and it'd be great to have a town meeting of 16,000 people, but it would be probably challenging to try to, coordinate that and get it done. So, I think one of the goals of our committee is to have other people within the community to participate over time. And because I think it's about 20 people who are meditators and about 20 who are not, who are townspeople. Although I think of ourselves, all of us are townspeople, so I don't know how. In fact, that was an issue we were kind of awkward as to
Still
how to
are.
define.
Addressing each other.
Right.
Still is. I mean, because we get say meditators and non-meditators, and then some people were like, "Well, but," and that is still, I think, an issue as to. And then somebody brought up at one of the meetings is, well, we shouldn't be segregating each other, but yet when we make reference, we have to somehow. So that's still been a challenge.
Right. Defining is somewhat of a challenge
Yeah.
sometimes. But I think that there are a lot of opportunities for our community going forward, but we'll be better off if we can communicate better, and if that really happens by people getting to know each other. I think one practical example of a number of things that have taken place as a result of our meeting on a monthly basis is, as you mentioned, Susan, there are a couple members from each of the two larger school systems, the MSAE School Board and the Fairfield School Board, that are on this group. Bob Wiegert from the Fairfield School Board and Brendan Narducci from the MSAE School Board. And as interesting as it may sound to some people, the two school boards actually had never met in any official capacity or otherwise, frankly. And as a result of these meetings over these months, both Bob and Brenda recognized, as did many others in the committee, the importance of our school system and the children getting to know each other better. And so I think it was in October, the two school boards actually had a social gathering at the Narducci's home, where the two school boards and their spouses had a chance to get to know each other somewhat. We also had one meeting was at the MSA school, so many of the people who don't meditate had a chance to see that environment. And were you there, Tim, on that? I think you were
Yes.
there, and Judy, you were there as well. No, okay. And then the following month we met at Fairfield High, and there were many meditators on the committee who had never been in the Fairfield High, which is a fantastic place in terms of the kind of education and the facilities. It was fabulous. I don't know if you want to mention anything about your experience when you went to MSAE.
I'd, of course, been through the building before, but I think it was especially interesting going through the classrooms and seeing some of the different teaching techniques that the teachers used and the different types of displays on the walls. That was especially interesting to me. The building, it's a nice building, but it was more interesting to see and understand a little bit of the way they approach the education process as compared to the more traditional manner of education, such as the use of Sanskrit as a learning tool within the elementary aged children. So that was, of course, interesting.
Another plus in our committee meetings is having two youth representatives, and I know one of them is Heather Hill, and the other one is?
Jenny Mescon.
Okay,
Both
and they
of whom are
both,
juniors, but now seniors this year.
and they both have brought a lot to our meetings, and hopefully will take to the younger age group some of our ideas, and that my belief is that when you grow up with diversity and differences, that you learn to have an appreciation of and acceptance, where a lot of us maybe didn't grow up with it, that when they do, they'll be more understanding and open-minded.
Mhm.
You know, one thought also is that we made it clear, the steering committee made it clear at the outset to the larger group that we're not here to try to have everybody think the same way or agree that this is how it should be, whatever it is. But to recognize the diversity and the strengths that can come from that. And it was interesting also to point out that many other communities are going through some similar challenges to us. We think of ourselves in our Fairfield community as somewhat unique because there are, I'm sure, very few, if any, other communities that have a meditator and a non-meditator kind of focal point. But actually the issues are much larger than that in many cases. There are many smaller communities throughout the country now that are dealing with people who are moving in from out of town, you know, the outsiders, because they want a better quality of life, you know, safer schools, safer streets, and so on, to get away from the congested bigger cities. And yet at the same time, you have the local people who are a little distrustful of out-of-towners or outsiders, and what that all means to the community. And as you mentioned, Susan, change is
Right.
discomforting for people. So I think there's a larger issue, really, that as a community that we're dealing with, that sometimes gets labeled as meditator, non-meditator, when it's really larger issues, you know, the challenges or the difficulties relative to the development of the north, and some of the farming interests who are concerned about that, you know, the whole thing that took place with the TIF, you know, recently. It certainly is a local issue and is one that raised a lot of concerns and emotions. But at the same time, I could point to probably 20 other communities in Iowa alone that are dealing with those issues of rural versus
Yes.
rural versus the city development or growth.
I know one meeting that I attended, I mentioned that very day I had been to Ottumwa, where they are dealing with diversity and having a special program that they're working with this and bringing workers into their community to be accepted. And so I felt like we were much further along than they were.
Right. In fact, I think some of you might recall there were some articles that were made available of some towns like in Ohio, small towns of 16,000 people, I forget the city, but you could have taken the name of that city and put Fairfield in it, and it would have, you know, it would have been our story.
Yeah.
So while we think we may be unique, we certainly are, there's still, I think there are some overarching similarities that many other communities are facing.
One of the handouts I think you might have given us at the meeting, and I noticed this as I was looking earlier, just because we are equal does not mean we are the same. And I thought that says an awful lot. And so you did have some handouts, different things that we would talk about and address. And something also in our meetings, we had some guidelines that we stressed. Such as arrive on time, be present in mind, share responsibility for following and enforcing meeting guidelines, stick to the agenda, listen respectfully and thoughtfully, no interruptions, actively participate, no killer phrases, disagree with respect, have fun with appropriate humor, and use consensus to make major decisions. And I thought these were all very important and helped us. And like you said, we're not there to change people's minds to our point of view, but rather to understand.
Right.
For me, that's the real power of the group, is that as we begin to understand each other individually rather than as categories, I believe that's what we can, through our own experience, what we can take out to the community. And that's how, other than any special projects that we might undertake, that's how we can really take what we're learning out to the community. To me, we've all got our comfort zones. And I mean, it's tough enough for me to socialize with the people that my meditator friends, let alone a whole nother circle of friends.
You mean because of time?
That's just my time issue. So there's my comfort zone. See, I have time as my excuse. But in spite of that, we still have opportunities as we walk through town. I mean, we all give the friendly hellos, but we can go further than that and just step over the line a little more and connect and ask about the family and really get into the more personal interactions rather than just think categorically of who this person is. And we have done it in our group, and that's the beauty of it. What we've done in our group is what we can begin to do effortlessly, really, every day in town. It just is a decision to step out of your comfort zone. So I'm very encouraged myself by what's been happening.
Anybody want to? I think we only have, a few more minutes left for this half-hour segment. Any other comments or suggestions?
I've got something. I just thought it was interesting, as both groups talked and individuals talked, was how much similar everybody is. I mean, a meditator one gentleman says, I go to the Dome, I go to work, I go to the Dome, I go home. And it's kind of like, many of us are real similar to that. We just don't hit the Dome in between there, But it was funny how, as conversations got going, how similar the interests are the same: family, the community being healthy. These kinds of things are concerns no matter who or where you are. So that was interesting too. I think a lot of people, both meditator and non-meditator, got a real eye opener that, hey, he's got the same concerns I do, or worried about. Another interesting thing on that, say it was the farmers talking to business people. They're like, yeah, I have that same concern, and Mr. Government and Mr. Taxes and things like that. And so that was really good. A lot of conversations going on that wouldn't have otherwise.
Didn't you have that exchange when you had was it the business exchange group where people went out into the community, and so that was also a good mending.
Yeah, that's been another, I think, great value that the Chamber's been offering the last 3 years. A lot of local people from the farming community have had a chance to see how businesses operate and vice versa. I mean,
Right.
farming is a business. It's also a lifestyle that most people, I don't think, who aren't in the farming community really can appreciate, when you're basically totally dependent upon the weather and farming prices and all the other things that are out of your control. It takes, I think, a great leap of faith, and we all, I think, need to be very grateful for our farming community and what they give us.
So I would like to thank you all for being here and sharing part of what we've been doing at the community relations meetings. And it's just a start. I think we all agree, and we hope to reach out to our community from here, and we'll continue meeting. And hopefully we'll start doing rather than just talking.
Right, there are actually a number of things that we're looking at being involved with. Back in November, the committee chose to focus on a new project that the Chamber of Commerce is involved with that will become more clear in the next number of weeks, having to do with a monument that will be taking place at the corner of 2nd and Burlington with bricks that can be made available that can be personalized, which will be the Chamber actually be a fundraiser for a new foundation that is under the arm of the Chamber, the Fairfield Development Foundation, which we all think can be a broad community and bring people together. But you'll hear more about that in the coming weeks. So.
And hopefully we'll have another show and update people on what we're doing.
Right, and if people have questions or comments. I don't know who they could direct them to me at the Chamber of Commerce or to you, perhaps, Susan. Here at FPAC, we'd be very happy to talk with people, get their comments and feedback.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all for today. Thank you, Fairfield. If you have comments, questions, or concerns that you would like the Fairfield Community Relations Committee to address, give one of them a call. And they are Roger Gay, Chris Small, Ginny Levi, Heather Hill, Terry Hayes, Jenny Meskin, Judith Cox, Pat Doyle, Jeff Wilson, Patty Robertson, Tim Fitzrandolph, Ashley Deans, Jeff Johnston, Bob Phipps, Joe Fritz, Bob Moore, Andy Nelson, Susan Kessel, Devlin Ort, Jan C. Husen, Bob Wiegert, Kevin Toohey, Howard Innes, Tony Lawler, Tom Kunkel, Tom Brooks, Janet Atwood, Chris Bush, Craig Foss, Sheila Terry, Brendan Arducci, Bev Nelson, Michael Blitz, Lynn Waters, Tim Kuiken, Robert Gates, Steve Williams, Sally Neff, Scott Waters, Evelyn Myers, and T.L. Henderson.